Dan and Amy, well, of course, Comey's testimony and the ongoing political theater associated with the special prosecutor now and the investigation into allegations of Russian collusion and the investigation into leakers and wherever the investigation may take us from yesterday after Jim Comey testified yet again before Congress. That's one thing that could potentially be impactful in the 2018 midterms and thus impactful on President Trump's legislative agenda, particularly the domestic agenda. Could what happened in Britain yesterday
happen here?
Be a canary in the coal mine for conservatives in 2018? Boy, to go from Brexit and the terrorist attacks to really dealing the Tories quite a blow yesterday, kicking what the British voters did was kick them out of the majority. They still have a plurality of seats in the parliament, but now Theresa May is scrambling, trying to form a minority government, in part by enlisting the trade unionist party. So that was not the result that was expected, particularly against a Labour Party led by Corbyn, who this guy has had some very disturbing with dalliances with terrorists.
Yeah, a
over
terrorist
the years.
sympathizer or something?
So what are we to make of those results in Britain and their application in terms of concerns for the U.S. and our special relationship? For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined again by Noah Rothman, who is Associate Editor for Commentary Magazine. Noah, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So what about that, your analysis of what happened and why it happened in Britain and what it portends for conservatives in the U.S.?
Yeah, well, it's probably a mistake to draw a straight line between domestic British politics and American politics. They're very distinct and are not really linked. What happened here, though, is something that conservatives should take to heart because, in my view, it has just about everything to do with the fact that this was a party that was afraid of its own shadow. It didn't have the conviction to stand by its own policy prescriptions and became confused and looked like a bad bet. That's not to say that there were a bunch of different mistakes. There were a ton of things that contributed to this. Theresa May had terrible political instincts. She didn't appear to want debate, for example. Donald Trump's decision to get into a fight with the London mayor created a variety of a swell of pro-labor sentiment in the greater London area, which cost conservatives a lot of seats in that area. But the biggest problem, in my view, was this manifesto, the party's manifesto, which they dropped, and then which contained a few pretty, bold conservative reforms that were met with a lot of resistance. And then the Conservative Party just sort of backed off them. They got scared, they didn't defend them, and they just abandoned them or dropped them or pushed them off or amended them. And it made them look weak and feeble and unable to withstand the pressures of politics for a conservative reform party, which, by the way, the Republican Party is supposed to be. So while flirting with populism and flirting with attracting liberal voters might have been the goal of trying to back off, it had the precise opposite effect. And, by the way, that effect is to legitimize somebody who you said correctly is a terrorist sympathizer, a soft anti-Semite, and Labor has absolutely no impetus now to back off of this guy as their party leader. It's a mark of civilizational decline, a real disaster.
And just one more point on Corbyn. I mean, this 1970s era Marxist, that's who he is. But he ran sort of a Bernie Sanders, or Labor did, but kind of a Bernie Sanders populist campaign to get the young and the old motivated, and that seems to have been a key to the surprising results.
Yeah, I mean, he benefited from a youth vote surge, and that's probably to be expected for any really socialist party. I mean, that really appeals to young voters. Where they lost. Where conservatives really lost it was this manifesto. One of the pledges was this effort to means test people for retirement benefits, for senior benefits. And that was lampooned as a quote-unquote dementia tax.
Right.
And as a result, conservatives just sort of backed off of it. And that was the sort of thing that lost them the upper middle income voter. So they lost the middle of the electorate. And that's where the conservatives really fell off the playing field. So they went from a 20-point advantage in the polls to a 5-point advantage in the polls to being slightly under in the polls, and they, as a result, lost their majority. So and the fact that Theresa May now, having lost this majority after calling an election that they didn't need to have, thinks she can govern as prime minister in some sort of a minority government is testament to her political acumen. She should have the decency to fall on her sword.
Well, she says she's going to vow to lead forward despite the staggering election blow. But I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier because I want to make sure I got this right. Donald Trump, President Trump's tweet about the London mayor, you think that cost conservative votes in the UK?
I think it resulted in a surge of sympathy for the Labour Party, to which Mayor Sadiq Khan is a member, in the Greater London area. Conservatives lost a lot of seats in this area, in the Greater Metropolitan London area. So it has something to do with it. Now, it's a really American chauvinistic point of view to think that American politics has virtually anything to do with British politics, but in this case, I don't think you can separate the two entirely.
What about Theresa May's proposals after the most recent terrorist attack in London that included expanding domestic police powers, her statement about being more aggressive at interdicting terrorism both in the public sector and in society, British society generally, discussions this past weekend, Nigel Farage on Fox News raising the prospect of interning Muslims on the watch list. Did that play into the results, do you think?
Yeah, it could have. I mean, it struck me as just a mark of desperation. They all saw where the polls were headed at that point. And I'm skeptical to think that the terrorist attacks had any real effect on this vote. But the notion that peddled by Theresa May in this moment of desperation that curtailing human rights laws in the UK in order to prevent these sorts of terrorist attacks it was desperation and smelled like it, and probably turned off a lot of people because it was such a grotesque sentiment. It's the kind of thing that deserves all the humiliation, the public humiliation that it gets. But I don't know necessarily if that really moved the needle. I feel like it was the cake was already baked by that point.
But isn't that sort of a comment? I mean, I guess that's a commentary going back to one of the takeaways I'm hearing from you, which is Theresa May's political instincts could be better. The idea she's running against a terrorist sympathizer and what's been happening in Britain, and she can't make the claim that me and the Tories are better positioned to maintain your security than Jeremy Corbyn and his gang.
Yeah, no, and that's what's so depressing about all this is that Jeremy Corbyn is now within striking distance of 10 Downing Street, and his worldview is that of a campus leftist college student. It is self-effacing and deluded about the strength and character of the West and its necessity and extroverted presence in the world by Great Britain and the United States in general, and a belief that terrorism is a response to Western provocation, which is the kind of thing that we've seen how America retreating from the world, it begets violence, instigates violence, results in violence. This is the kind of worldview that will create more terrorism. And the fact that this is now a realistic prospect, to say nothing of his prejudices and his nostalgic view of Marxist nationalization efforts in the domestic front, his view of British power, his skepticism of it and frustration with it is something that's really genuinely dangerous, and it could very well become a British foreign policy in the very near future. That's scary.
Now, Theresa May is, vowing to form a new party and all that, a new government, excuse me. But do you think that she should step down?
I do. I can't imagine what she thinks she's going to do as prime minister. She called an election seeking legitimacy and essentially got a vote of no confidence.
Right.
So, I can imagine that her only, thought here is she's seeking to prevent the ascension of now Foreign Secretary, former London Mayor Boris Johnson, who is very likely to replace her, among other candidates, but he's probably the most prominent. But otherwise, I can't see what she's thinking at this point. She doesn't really have the confidence of her party. Certainly doesn't have the confidence of the country. So how is she going to govern in a minority government?
It seems like the climate in the West now is that the pendulum can swing wildly, very quickly, from Brexit to this occurrence. And again, just in terms of lessons to be learned, the lesson you're suggesting for the Republican Party in this country is go forth boldly in the direction of doing what you said you would do. Yes?
Yeah, that's one thing. Do what you said you would do and defend your actions and your thought process behind that with some conviction, which this conservative party failed to do. But now twice they've put their own legitimacy before voters, where they had won their legitimacy in 2015. Then they put it in front of voters for Brexit, and then they put it in front of voters for this special election, and they lost it. Now, both of those were, in retrospect, mistakes. And it didn't have to be this way. Conservatives enjoyed a majority until 2020, and they've thrown it all away.
He is Noah Rothman, Associate Editor for Commentary Magazine. Noah, thanks again for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.